Spade back here with you from High Noon Leatherworks for another leather adventure. And today we're going to continue the Barkeep Western style holster. And last episode we did the tiger stripe effect on the dyeing job, and today we're going to move on to the stitching. So come on in and let's get started. Alright, so there's two stitching jobs we need to do on this holster. The first one is for the belt loop. So I need to stitch that. I've got that in a triangle design. I want to stitch that first. Well, you'll have to, because and that's the thing, you kind of have to do a in mind's eye type of thing and look forward, because if we went ahead and stitched this, then there's no way to get to this back here inside the holster. So you got to make sure, okay, you know, if I do this, how's that going to affect my next step? So we want to stitch this first for the belt loop, and when I do that, it's been a rule of thumb that I learned a long time ago, that I always take my measurement of my thread or my sinew that I'm going to use, and I do the entire length of what I'm going to stitch, in other words, the actual length of my stitches, and then I take that times 4, because I'm using 2 needles. I'm doing a saddle stitch, so it's going to take up more sinew or more thread than a single stitch. So I'll go through and I'll double that over until I get 4 times the length of my actual stitching. And then I want to make sure that I always have plenty. I'm an advocate for make sure that I'd rather throw away a few inches at the end than come up an inch short. So it just makes for a real headache if you come up short. So normally what I do, especially on shorter lengths like this, is I'll go another full length. So I'll go 5 times the actual length of my stitch, what I'm sewing. I'll cut that off, set that aside. I've got my 2 needles here. I'll probably need my small needle nose pliers, and they are very small. You see them, but they work great on these needles. And then for my saddle stitching, I'll put my sinew through one side, one needle, pull it down, and I pulled it down approximately about 5 inches or so, and then take my second needle and thread it the exact same way on the other end of my thread. And this is waxed synthetic sinew is what this thread is. And then the key to that is to make sure that I hold my needles up and that my thread is coming down, lines up with my other needle. Get this out of the way. That way both of my threads are the exact same length. So as I'm stitching and then I start pulling this through the needle so that I use up this thread, they're going to be even on each side. I don't end up short on one side or the other. So I use these if I need to pull through, because I'm putting 2 needles through the same holes every time. Now on this, I'd like to end up down here at the bottom of this point. There you go. I'd like to end up down here at the bottom so I can hide my thread underneath this piece right here. So I'm going to start over here, and I'll start right here at the bottom, one thread over, or one hole over from the point of the bottom. And again, I'll find that hole make sure I have the right hole, because once I match up the hole on the other side, which is going to be a lot easier, once I match that up, then I can work my way around. So let's pull that through, and you can see I'm pulling a pretty good sized needle through there and some pretty heavy duty sinew. So I'm going to pull that through, and then I'm going to make sure that my needles match, that my thread is even on both sides. Now, when I go back through, I want to go back through the back side, the next hole. Then I want to make sure, and once you get these matched up, the first couple holes, then they'll be matched up as you tighten your threads or your knots. So let's pull that through. Now don't pull too hard or you'll pull this side. So you just want to snug it down a little bit. Now remember, we're saddle stitching, so I'm going to take the second needle that's through this side, and I'm going to put it back through that same hole I just pulled that needle through. And then this is where it gets a little tricky as far as matching up the first couple of holes. And again, you can pull that back just a hair if you need to see, because it's not locked in yet. It's not going to be locked in until about the second stitch. So let's pull that through that same hole, and then you can take both ends and snug them down. You don't have to pull super hard. You can do that on the next one, but you want to snug that down, so what you're doing is you're kind of matching up those holes. As you move along, you can pull this thread out to give you more to pull through, and you do the same on each side. Once you get it in that first stitch, and that'll keep that from sliding through right here as you pull those stitches through. So the next stitch, I'll go through the next hole and make sure I'm through this next hole on the back so that they match. I'll pull that through, and those holes you'll find kind of close up a little bit. You've already punched them, but then when you go and dye those, that leather, it'll want to close up a little bit. The hole's still there, it just wants to shrink up on you a little bit. So we put the needle through both sides. Now when you pull that tight from both sides, now that's locked in. Especially that first stitch is good and locked in. So now our holes that we punched through both pieces of leather, or both sides of the leather, should be lining up much easier now. You can see now that's going through both sides and the holes are matching up. So as we get through that second stitch and get it locked in, that pulls that leather together. We'll go through that side, take the second needle, come back, and you can see that needle goes through that hole just fine. We'll pull that through, and then every stitch we want to lock in by pulling on both sides. Then I'll continue around, continuing the same steps. I want to go through the front side, or what I'm calling the front side, through to the back or the inside. Make sure I get it in the right hole. And then you notice when I pull that through the first time, I pull that needle back away from that hole. And what I'm doing is I'm opening that hole up for my other needle to go through. So here's my second needle on this side, and when I do that, that allows that to open that up, so it makes it a lot easier to put my needle through the back side. Plus it keeps you from splitting your thread. And you notice each time I'm pulling on each side of that, and that's locking in each one of those stitches. So I'm going to continue on around doing the same front to back, back to front, locking those stitches in. When I get back around to the end here, I'll go ahead and stop it, and we'll go back to regular time, and I'll show you how I'm going to finish this stitch off. Alright, so I'm down now to the last two holes, and there's a couple of ways you could do this. We can go ahead and just continue front to back and back to front just like normal till we get to the end, but you can also do a double stitch to lock everything in. Now I'm going to hide this last stitch and tie it underneath my belt flap, my belt loop. So I'm not too concerned about doing a back double stitch on this one. This saddle stitching, it takes a little longer, but it is very, very strong, and it will last under a lot of tension and pressure. I've never had any problems with a saddle stitch coming loose or giving anybody any problems. Now on this last one, I'm going to go through the very last hole from the front, and then I'm going to push this part where my thumb is. I'm going to push that part of that holster over, and I'm going to push. You can see the needle coming up between there. So I'm pulling that needle just through the flap part, and I'm going to snug that up. Now on the back side, I have to complete that. So I'll do the same, and I'll pull that apart as best I can. It's not going to come loose on you because you have so many locked stitches. Same thing, pull it through so that it's through both, in the middle of both pieces of leather. Pull it the rest of the way through. Now I can take my needles off, and my thread, you can see it coming out between those two pieces of leather. And there's all my stitches locked in. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull on both of these. Now one's coming from the back, one's coming from the front. And then I'm just going to tie a good old granny knot. And as I tie that, that knot slides up underneath those two pieces of leather. Now I'm going to tie it one more time. And I'm going to cut that. And I'm just going to cut it barely short. And if you can see that, that leaves those two threads hanging out barely. So I'm going to take those two threads, I'm going to put them together the best I can, and I might have to use my small needle nose, and I'm going to pull those up. Remember, that's waxed sinew. So I'm going to pull those up, and I'm going to try to kind of twist those together a little bit. I want those two to be very close, if not touching. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my mallet, have it ready, take my lighter, and I'm going to, from the side, I'm going to light my lighter away from my leather, away from my thread, and then I'm going to move up to it until it starts melting. Once it starts melting, I can take my needle nose, push that melted part of my sinew underneath, take my mallet, and it flattens that down so you can't see where that knot is underneath. So you light it, melt it, push it up underneath there, flatten it down. Makes a nice, clean stitch, nice, clean finish. And then our belt will go right through there. So that's how I do that strap, that belt loop strap stitching on that type. The next thing we want to do is pull this over and do our stitching down the side. I want to finish this down here at the bottom so that nobody could see the tied knot up here at all. So it's going to finish at the bottom. So I'll start at the top. Same thing. I'm going to take my sinew and I'm going to go the length of my stitch, and it's got a curve in it, so you want to try to make sure you get that curve in there. Go the length of your stitch, and then again I'm going to go 4 times that length. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1 for good measure, because remember, I don't want to end up short. Look how much I ended up with when I was done on that other piece. About 3.5 inches or so. So I'd rather end up with that. Sinew, the synthetic sinew is not that expensive. I'd much rather end up with that than being short. And if you're short, then that causes all kinds of issues where you have to restart another stitch, and then you end up with double the thickness of sinew in a certain spot, and it just doesn't look good. So I'll cut my sinew, move these scraps out of the way, take my needles just like I did when I started the other side. I'm still going to use the same stitch. I'm still going to use the saddle stitch. And this will be the same way. It'll take a couple of stitches to get going and get it locked in. I want to make sure that my thread's hanging down about the same length on both sides. There we go. You can pull on those a little bit. Remember, that's waxed, so that will kind of stick in that needle, that eye of that needle, which makes it nice. Then I can take my holster, fold it over. I'm going to end here, so I'm going to start up here. And this part of the holster where the gun goes in here, and like I said, it's going to take a couple of stitches to get that locked in there, because it's naturally going to want to open on you. But up here, I talked about a double stitch, a back stitch at the end of this. Well, I am going to back stitch this at the beginning, because that's where it's going to take a lot of wear and tear, where that gun goes in and out of this holster. So I am going to go to my second hole, pull my sinew through, take my back needle, put it through the hole from the back to the front, pull that needle through. That would be my first stitch. So that's actually the first stitch in the first 2 holes. Now, what I'm going to do to lock that in and do a back stitch or a double stitch, take my needle and go back through my first hole, front to back. Now, obviously, it's going to be kind of tough, because now I've already got thread through those holes. I'll take my back needle from back to front, and that's going to make it even tougher to get through that hole, because now I've got 3 thicknesses of thread. But what that does is that puts a double layer or thickness of that sinew in that first hole, and it locks that in. So it is super strong. It's going to be twice as strong as if you only put a single one in there. Now I'll come back through the second hole. That's what locks in that double stitch. And remember, this is going to be a little tough because of the double amount. And it seems like a little overkill, because a saddle stitch is so tough anyway, but it's really not. What you're doing is you're buying yourself some insurance by putting that double locking stitch in there, that back stitch, and it makes that really strong, and it makes it durable. Now, you saw how hard it was to pull those needles through there when it gets that thick. That's, if I break an eye of a needle, that's when I break it, is when I'm trying to do a back stitch, double stitch, is I'm pulling on that needle so hard, sometimes I'll blow out the back of the needle. So you want to make sure you always have extra needles around. Now I'll go to the second hole, or actually the third hole, and go through both sides of the leather. I'll go front to back, get my hand out of the way, and then I'll go back to front. So now I'm just into my, once I get that double back stitch in there, now I'm just into my normal saddle stitch. Pull that through, now I can lock it in, and both of those stitches are locked in. So I'm ready to travel on down and finish this side up. I'm going to come back when I'm down to the bottom, ready to lock this in at the end. So stay tuned. Alright, so I'm down now to the last two holes. So all this is stitched. I'm going to go front to back. Pull that through. Try not to lose my needle there. I'm going to go back to front, and that leaves me the last hole. And make sure I lock that stitch in there. On that last hole, I'm going to go front to back through both thicknesses of leather, and then I'm going to go back to front through both thicknesses, because I want to lock that last stitch in. Pull that through, lock that last stitch in. Then I'm going to do that locking stitch again. So I'll go back one hole. I'm doing the locking stitch just like I did at the beginning. So I'll go back one hole. Hope I don't break my needle, because with two thicknesses of sinew through there, makes it very difficult to get your needle through. And then I'll go through the last hole, front, back to front, pull my needle through, lock that double stitch in, now I can take my needle in the front, and I'm going to go, I got to keep my thread in there. And when your thread gets a little short, it starts presenting a few challenges there. But now, to get that through there, it's going to be very difficult, because I got to go through two thicknesses of leather and two thicknesses of the sinew. So you could see when you get that locking. I hope you can see it. You get that last locked back stitch in there. It does appear a little bigger than the others, obviously, because it has two thicknesses of sinew through there. And then I'm going to pull that toward the end, and I'm going to try to get that from back to front one more time, and then that'll complete that locking stitch. And I'm trying to pull that needle through there as straight as I possibly can, because it's very easy to bend a needle when you're at that point. Either bend it or break it. So I'll lock that in good and tight. Now you notice I pulled both my needles out of there. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick my finger in the end of the holster here, push toward the stitching side right here, and that'll open that up just a little bit. And I'm going to try to put that needle through just the first thickness of that leather, like so. So it's coming out between, just like I did on this. I'm coming out between there. I'll take my thread and put it back through the eye of the needle, and then I can pull that needle through that one thickness, hopefully without breaking the needle. So it pulled it through. Now it came out between those two pieces. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Put my finger in there, spread that apart, take my needle, work it through that back side of that leather, and you can see I'm pushing that up again between there. I'll take the thread from the back, go ahead and put it through the eye, and pull that thread through the back. Now you can grab a hold of that sinew toward the end and pull, twist and pull on that to get it nice and tight. Now here's where I'm going to do my granny knot again. And as I pull that down tight, that pulls that down into that V, or right at the end of where those two pieces of leather meet at the end of the holster. So I'm going to pull that down good and tight, pull both of those together, twist it, cut that off, take my lighter, light it away, move toward till it starts to melt, push it down between those two pieces of leather like so, take my mallet, and hit it where it flattens that knot out, and now it's hidden. Now you can't see it. So we get a nice clean finish, no knots showing on the front, the back, the knots are all hidden. And there's our stitched holster. Alright, so there's the next step complete. We've got our stitching for our belt loop. We've got our stitching done along the backbone of the holster. So the next time you come back, we'll be wrapping this project up. So we've got one more step in finishing this to make it real nice and sharp and custom to the Heritage Barkeep. So thanks a lot for coming along. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. And as I always say, please like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you next time.